So for articulations in lab, you should be familiar with your articulations after chapter 9 in the textbook. And I'm just going to have you identify, as we go through the lab practicum, different types of articulations. So if I have a bone, I might ask you to tell me the articulation that occurs at that point, so you should be able to name the articulation. So gomphoses, if I have a label here and I have a skull, gomphoses are going to be attaching the teeth into the mandible or maxilla. You know that you have different sutures along the skull, so the sagittal suture, the coronal suture. You should be able to identify a suture joint if I ask you. Pretty straightforward. Syndesmoses, again, those would be forming between the ulna and radius, or between the tibia and fibula. Looking at a symphysis, again, should be able to identify the difference, or a symphysis is fibrocartilage, so symphysis referring to a fibrocartilage joint. So the pubic symphysis is a good example. In between vertebra at the vertebral bodies would be another location for symphysis. Another cartilaginous joint, if you look at the first ribs, that is a synchondroses. Okay, so that's another example of a cartilaginous joint. Looking at synovial joints, ball and sockets are pretty easy. So the head of the femur, or head of the humerus connecting with the glenoid cavity. You could have the head of the femur articulating with the acetabulum for ball and socket joints. For condylar joints, could have the occipital condyles and its articulation with atlas. Hinge joints, prime hinge joint is the articulation of the ulna with the trochlea of the humerus. Plane joints, an example would be the articulation of os cocci with the sacrum, so the sacroiliac joints. Okay, so you have many different joints around that you could be identifying. And I'll just name a bone, or you'll be naming bones and have to identify these joints associated with the bones. That should do it for articulation.